The bullet whistled past Caleth's ear as he dove behind the overturned wagon, his weathered hands instinctively reaching for the Colt .45 at his hip before freezing mid-motion. The familiar weight of the weapon felt like a curse against his palm. As he forced himself to pull away, pressing his back against the splintered wood instead. "Come on out, Drifter." Mordecai Vex's voice cut through the desert air like a rusted blade. "We know you're armed. Why don't you make this interesting?" Caleth closed his eyes, fighting the muscle memory that screamed at him to draw. 3 years since he'd last pulled iron on a man, and the ghosts of those he'd killed still haunted his dreams. The legendary gunslinger who'd once been feared from Tombstone to Dodge. City had sworn an oath on his brother's grave never again. Would he take a life? "I told you, boys," Caleth called back, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "I'm not looking for trouble, just passing through." A harsh laugh echoed from behind the saloon. "Passing through? You cost us $20,000 when you refused Gideon Crow's job offer. That's trouble enough." More shots rang out, splintering the wagon further. Caleth counted at least 5 different weapons Vex's gang had grown since their last encounter. His mind raced, calculating angles and cover, old instincts dying hard. But his gun remained holstered. "Stubborn fool," muttered Jasper, one of Vex's men, reloading behind a water trough. "Just shoot him and be done with it." "No." Vex's voice carried a cruel edge. "I want to see the great Caleth Stormwind break. I want to see him reach for that gun." The standoff stretched on, the desert sun beating down mercilessly. Caleth's throat was parched, but he didn't dare move for his canteen. These men weren't just outlaws, they were hunters, and he was their prize. The bounty on his head had tripled since Crow put out word that the infamous gunslinger had gone soft. A movement caught his eye from the general store across the street. Through the dusty window he saw Herizadora Quinn, the woman who'd changed everything. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon light as she pressed herself against the wall, clearly trying to stay hidden. Her green eyes met his for just a moment, and he saw the fear there. The worry etched across her beautiful face. She mouthed something he couldn't make out, probably telling him to run. Sweet Isadora, who'd somehow seen past his reputation too. The man beneath. It's the woman who'd made him believe redemption was possible. "You know what I think?" Vex continued, his voice getting closer. "I think you've lost your nerve. The great Caleth Stormwind, reduced to a yellow-bellied coward." The insults rolled off him like water. He'd heard worse, been called worse. But then Vex's next words made his blood run cold. "Maybe we should pay. A visit to that pretty little shopkeeper you've been sweet on. I hear she's got real fine manners." Caleth's jaw clenched, his hand hovering over his weapon. Through the window, he saw Isadora's face pale as she realized what was happening. Shook her head desperately, but the damage was done. They knew about her. They knew about the one thing in this world that could make him break his sacred vow. The general store's bell chimed as Vex's men kicked open the door, their spurs jingling ominously against the wooden floor. Caleth watched helplessly from behind. The wagon, as 3 armed men disappeared inside, their laughter echoing through the small frontier town. "No sudden moves, pretty lady," came Jasper's voice from within. "We're just here to have a friendly chat." Caleth's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wagon's edge. Every instinct screamed at him to charge in, guns blazing, but he knew it would be suicide. 5 against 1, with Isadora caught in the crossfire. He needed to be smart, not reckless. "What do you want?" Isadora's voice carried through the open door, steady despite the circumstances. That was his brave girl never showing fear, even when surrounded by wolves. "Information," Vex replied, his boots clicking as he paced around the store. "About your friend outside. The one who's too proud to come save you." "I don't know what you're talking about." A crash of breaking glass made Caleth flinch. "Don't lie to me, girl. Half the town's seen you two together. Word is, he's been courting you proper-like." Silence stretched between them, and Caleth could imagine Isadora's defiant stare. She'd rather die than betray him, which was exactly what worried him most. "He's not what you think," she finally said. "Caleth's a good man. He doesn't hurt people anymore. That's what makes this so interesting." Vex's voice dripped with malice. "See, we've got a job for him. Simple thing, really. There's a sheriff down in Millbrook who's been causing our boss some trouble. One bullet, and we'll leave you both alone. He won't do it. Oh, I think he will, especially when he sees what happens to stubborn shopkeepers who don't cooperate. Sound of a gun being cocked echoed from the store. Khalith's hand moved to his weapon before he caught himself, sweat beading on his forehead. He'd walked away from violence. He's built a new life here in Cedar Falls. But watching the woman he loved being threatened was tearing him apart. You see, Miss Quinn, Vex continued. Your beau used to be quite the killer, fastest draw in 3 territories. But something changed him, made him soft. I'm betting that something was you. Leave her alone, Vex. Khalith finally called out, unable to stay silent any longer. Ah, there's the fire. Come on out, gunslinger. Let's discuss terms. Khalith slowly rose from behind the wagon, his hands visible. But ready? The street was empty, except for a few brave souls peering through windows. The cowards on the town council had refused to hire a proper sheriff, leaving places like this vulnerable to men like Vex. Let her go, Khalith said, stepping into the open. Your quarrel is with me. That's where you're wrong, friend. My quarrel is with your principles. You've gone soft, and that makes you useless. But threaten something you care about. Vex appeared in the doorway, his arm around Isadora's shoulders, pressing a gun to her temple. Now you're motivated. Isadora's eyes met his across the dusty street. She wasn't crying, wasn't pleading. Instead, she looked at him with something. That might have been pride. Even facing death, she believed in the man he'd become. One job, Vex repeated. Kill Sheriff Morrison in Millbrook, and we'll disappear. Refuse, and the girl pays the price. The desert wind picked up, swirling dust around them. Khalith's hand hovered over his gun, feeling the weight of impossible choice. 3 years of peace, of building something good, hung in the balance. You've got until sundown to decide, Vex said, dragging Isadora back into the store. Think carefully. Stormwind. Some things are more important than principles. As the door slammed shut, Khalith stood alone in the street, the shadows growing longer around him. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the desert sky. The old church on the hill overlooked Cedar Falls like a weathered sentinel. Its bell tower, casting long shadows across the cemetery where Khalith knelt beside a simple wooden cross. The grave marker bore no name, just a carved symbol of crossed pistols, a reminder of the brother he'd failed to save. I don't know what to do, Josiah, he whispered to the wind. I swore I'd never kill again, but they've got her. But the sun was already past its zenith, giving him maybe 3 hours before Vex's deadline. He'd spent the last hour trying to formulate a plan that didn't involve bloodshed, but every scenario ended the same way, with Isadora dead and his principles intact, or with Sheriff Morrison dead and his soul damned. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind him. Khalith's hand moved instinctively to his gun before he recognized the familiar gait of Doc Henley. The town's physician, and one of the few men who'd shown him kindness when he'd first arrived in Cedar Falls. Thought I might find you here, Doc said, settling his aging bones on a nearby headstone. Words spreading about what happened in town, and you know why I can't help. I know why you think you can't. Doc pulled out his pipe, taking his time to pack it with tobacco. Mind if I tell you a story? Khalith remained silent, his eyes fixed on his brother's grave. 20 years ago, I was a battlefield surgeon during the Apache Wars. Had a code then, same as you do now. First, do no harm. Took that oath seriously. Treated every wounded man the same, whether he wore blue or buckskin. The old man struck. A match the flame dancing in the evening breeze. Then came the day a war chief brought his wounded son to my tent. Beautiful boy, maybe 16. Arrow through the lung, but treatable. Saved his life, proud of keeping my oath. What happened? That same boy, 2 weeks later, led a raid on a settlement 20 miles south. Killed 12 people, including a pregnant woman and her children. Doc's voice grew heavy. Sometimes doing no harm means allowing greater harm to flourish. Khalith looked up sharply. You saying I should kill Sheriff Morrison? Saying. Maybe the question isn't whether you should break your oath, but whether your oath is worth more than an innocent woman's life. Doc stood, adjusting his hat. Isadora Quinn is good people, the kind this world needs more of. And Sheriff Morrison? What about him? Don't know the man personally, but I've heard things. Millbrook's been cleaned up considerably since he took office. Decent man, from what I gather. The weight of impossible choice pressed down on Caleth's shoulders. Save the woman he loved by killing a good man, or watch her die to preserve his principles. There had to be another way. There's something else, Doc continued. Been asking around about this Vex character. Turns out he's not just some random outlaw. What do you mean he's working for someone bigger? Someone who wants you specifically to kill Morrison? This isn't about revenge, Caleth. It's about using your reputation to remove an obstacle. The pieces began falling into place. Gideon Crow, the crime boss who'd tried to hire him months ago. The man was known for his long-term schemes, his ability to manipulate people into doing his dirty work. If Morrison was causing problems for Crow's operations, they're using me, Caleth realized. And they're using Isadora to do it. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Caleth stood, brushing dust from his knees. For the first time since the confrontation began, he felt a spark of his old self stirring. Not the killer, but the strategist. The man who'd survived countless gunfights, not just because he was fast, but because he was smart. I'm going to save her, he said quietly, without becoming the monster they want me to be. How? Caleth's hand finally settled on his gun, but not with the intention to kill. By remembering that there are more ways to use this than just pulling the trigger. Thunder rumbled overhead as the first drops of rain began to fall. In the distance, the church bell tolled the hour. Time was running out. The rain turned the dusty street into a muddy quagmire as Caleth made his way back toward town, mind racing through possibilities. He'd spent 3 years learning to see solutions beyond violence. And now that knowledge would be put to the ultimate test. The general store sat like a fortress in the town's center. Lamplight flickering through the windows, Vex's men had positioned themselves strategically too on the roof of the adjacent saloon, one watching the back alley, and 2 inside with Isadora. Professional setup, but Caleth had faced worse odds. He approached the store slowly, hands visible, drawing the attention of the rooftop sentries. I want to talk to Vex. About time, came the reply from inside. You ready to see reason? I need to know she's safe first. The door cracked open, and Isadora was pushed partially into view. Her dress was torn, and there was a bruise on her cheek, but her eyes still held that defiant spark he'd fallen in love with. I'm all right, Caleth, she called out. Don't do what they want, please. Touching, Vex's voice cut through the rain. Now, about Sheriff Morrison. ... I'll do it, Caleth said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. But I want to see her walk free first. That's not how this works, friend. You kill Morrison, bring back proof, then we'll talk about releasing your lady. Caleth had expected as much. Men like Vex never honored their word. How do I know you won't just kill her anyway? You don't, but you know what happens if you refuse. Standoff stretched between them, rain hammering the wooden buildings. Caleth made a show of considering his options, all while noting the positions of Vex's men. The storm was actually working in his favor. Reduced visibility, cover for movement, and the sound of rain masking subtle noises. All right, he said finally. Give me until tomorrow evening. Morrison's no pushover, this will take planning. Have until dawn, Vex countered. Now plenty of time for a man of your ... talents. Dawn, it is. As Caleth turned to leave, he caught Isadora's eye and gave her the slightest nod. She'd been watching him long enough to recognize his tells. He wasn't giving up. He was buying time. The old livery stable on the edge of town had been abandoned for months, but it still provided adequate shelter. Caleth made his way there through the rain, apparently heading for his horse. Once inside, he began preparations that had nothing to do with riding to Millbrook. From his saddlebags, he retrieved items that most people wouldn't associate with. A reformed gunslinger. A small bottle of laudanum from Doc Henley's medical supplies. A handful of firecrackers left over from the last 4th of July celebration. And a length of rope he'd been using to repair his gear. His first stop was the saloon's back entrance. The building connected to the general store through a shared wall. Caleth had noticed something during his earlier observation. The rain was collecting in the gutters, creating a perfect conductor for his plan. Working quickly, he placed the firecrackers along the roof's edge, using the rope to create a series of small charges that would create maximum noise and confusion. The laudanum went into the saloon's water barrel, not enough to kill, but sufficient to make anyone who drank it drowsy and disoriented. Next, he moved to the back of the general store, where a narrow window provided access to the storeroom. The lock was old and rust-weakened. A few minutes with his knife, and he was inside. The building's layout was familiar to him from his many visits to see Isadora. The main store occupied the front, with a small living area behind it and a storeroom in the back. He could hear voices from the main room, Vex giving orders to his men, discussing their plans for after the job was done. "Once Morrison's dead, and we've got proof, we'll take the girl back to Crow," Vex was saying. "He's got special plans for her." Caleth's blood ran cold. They'd never intended to release Isadora. She was another piece in Crow's game, leveraged to keep him under control permanently. Moving like a shadow through the storeroom, he began the next phase of his plan. The general store sold everything a frontier town needed, including black powder for mining operations. A carefully placed charge in the right location could create a distraction without bringing down the building as he worked. He could hear Isadora's voice, steady and calm despite her circumstances. She was engaging her captors in conversation, keeping their attention focused on her rather than their surroundings. "You know he won't do it," she was saying. "Caleth's not a killer anymore." "Everyone's a killer when you find the right pressure point," Vex replied. "And you, my dear, are perfect pressure." The storm intensified as midnight approached, providing perfect cover for Caleth's preparations. He'd positioned himself in the church bell tower, the highest point in Cedar Falls, with a clear view of the general store and its surroundings. The rain had driven most of Vex's lookouts indoors, leaving only the most dedicated at their posts. Through the scope of his rifle, a weapon he'd kept for hunting, Caleth could see the shadows moving inside the store. Isadora sat in a chair near the window, her hands bound but her posture defiant. Two of Vex's men flanked her, while the leader himself paced the room like a caged animal. Caleth checked his pocket watch. 3 hours until dawn, 3 hours until Vex expected him to return with proof of Sheriff Morrison's death. Instead, he planned to end this siege without firing a single shot at a human being. His first move was a carefully aimed shot at the rope holding the saloon's sign. The heavy wooden placard crashed down onto the roof where two of Vex's men were stationed, sending them scrambling for cover. In the confusion, Caleth's prepared firecrackers began exploding in sequence, creating the impression of multiple gunmen attacking from different directions. "We're under attack," one of the men shouted, panic clear in his voice. Vex's voice cut through the chaos from inside the store. "Positions! Everyone to your positions!" This was exactly what Caleth had hoped for in their rush to defend against an imagined assault. Vex's men were abandoning their careful positioning. The sentry watching the back alley ran toward the front of the building, leaving the rear entrance unguarded. Caleth made his way down from the bell tower, moving through the shadows with practiced stealth. The years of peace hadn't dulled his skills, they'd simply given him new ways to use them. Instead of stalking prey to kill, he was now hunting to save. The back door of the general store stood slightly ajar, rain blowing through the gap. Caleth slipped inside, his boots making no sound on the wooden floor. The building's interior was dark except for the lamplight coming from the main room. He could hear Vex shouting orders. "Jasper, take the roof. Colt, watch the street. Someone's playing games with us." "What about the girl?" came a nervous voice. "She's not going anywhere. Just keep her quiet." Caleth moved through the storeroom, avoiding the creaking floorboards he'd memorized during his courtship of Isadora. The woman he loved was 20 feet away, surrounded by armed men who intended to kill her regardless of his compliance. His hand found the fuse he'd rigged to the black powder charge, not enough to seriously harm anyone, but sufficient to create chaos. He lit it and quickly moved to the adjoining wall, where he began working on the boards with his knife. The explosion came exactly when expected, a thunderous boom that shook the building and sent smoke billowing through the main room. Shouts of alarm and confusion erupted from Vex's men as they tried to understand what was happening. The building's on fire, someone screamed. No, it's not, someone's playing us. In the chaos, Caliph broke through the wall boards he'd been, weakening, creating a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. He could see Isadora through the smoke, still tied to her chair, but alert and watching for an opportunity. Their eyes met across the smoky room. He held up his hand, silently asking her to wait. The timing had to be perfect. Another series of firecracker explosions erupted outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Vex's men were shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition, and abandoning their positions to chase phantoms. Enough. Vex's voice cut through the pandemonium. This is Stormwind. He's here for the girl. The man was smarter than his followers, but not smart enough to realize he was being played. Elith had counted on Vex's knowledge of his reputation, the legendary gunslinger who always came for what was his. Show yourself, Stormwind, Vex called out, pressing his gun to Isadora's head. I know you're here. Face me like a man. The smoke was beginning to clear, revealing the damage from the explosion. No one was seriously hurt, but the psychological impact was exactly what Caliph had intended. Vex's men were jumpy, scared, and making mistakes. I'm here, Caliph said, stepping into the doorway with his hands visible. Let her go, and we'll settle this between us. That's more like it. Vex's smile was predatory. Though I have to say, this is quite the elaborate show, just to avoid doing a simple job. Nothing simple about murder. Everything's simple about murder. Point, shoot, collect payment. You used to understand that. Caliph took a step closer, noting the positions of the remaining men. 2 were still in the room, but they were distracted by the destruction around them. The others were outside, chasing shadows. Things change, he said quietly. Men change. Not men like us. We're killers. Stormwind. It's what we do.
Elith
Replied, his voice steady. It's what you do. What I used to do. But I found something worth more than reputation. He looked at Isadora, seeing the trust in her eyes despite the gun at her head. She believed in him, in the man he'd become. That faith was worth more than any quick-draw victory. How touching, Vex sneered. But it doesn't change anything. You're still going to kill Morrison, or she's going to die. Actually, Caliph said, his hand moving slowly toward his gun, there's a third option. The lamplight flickered across the smoke-filled room as Calith's hand settled on his gun grip. Not to draw, not yet, but to feel the familiar weight of the weapon that had defined his life for so long. Vex's eyes tracked the movement, his own finger tightening on the trigger pressed to Isadora's temple. Careful now, Vex warned. Wrong move, and your lady friend decorates the wall? I know. Calith's voice was steady, almost conversational. But here's what you don't know about me, Vex. I've spent 3 years learning to think before I shoot. And I've been thinking about this situation very carefully. Have you now? See, you made a mistake when you assumed I was the same man who terrorized this territory years ago. That man would have come in here shooting, probably gotten Isadora, killed in the process. But I'm not that man anymore. Caliph took another step closer, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. You want to know what I've learned? There are 2 kinds of fast draws. The kind that's all about speed, and the kind that's about timing. Philosophy lessons. Vex laughed, but there was nervousness in his voice. From a man who's lost his nerve. I haven't lost anything. I've gained perspective. Caliph's eyes never left Vex's, reading the man's tells like a book. For instance, I know that gun you're holding isn't fully cocked. You've got it pressed to her head, but you'd need to pull the hammer back to fire. That's about a half-second of movement. Vex's confident smile faltered slightly. Half a second's more than enough to kill her. Maybe. But you know what's interesting about this room? Look around. All that smoke, all that confusion. You lost track of your men. They're scattered, chasing shadows outside. You're alone in. Here with me. For the first time, Vex's eyes darted around the room. The 2 men who'd been with him had indeed disappeared during the chaos, drawn outside by the continuing sounds of explosions and gunfire. Doesn't matter, Vex said, but his voice lacked conviction. I only need 1 shot. True. But here's the thing about timing versus speed. Caliph's hand remained motionless on his gun, You've been watching you for the past 10 minutes.
Are you favor?
Your right side when you're nervous. You shift your weight to your back foot when you're about to make a move. Right now you're doing both. Isadora's eyes had never left Khalith's face. She'd been watching him too, learning his signals. Almost imperceptibly, she tensed her muscles, preparing for something. You're bluffing, Vex said, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool air coming through the damaged wall. Let me tell you what's going to happen. In about 30 seconds, that laudanum I put in your water supply is going to hit your system. Your men have been drinking from the saloon's barrel all evening, making drowsy, making mistakes. But you've been too focused on me to drink anything. What are you talking about? Check your left coat pocket. Vex's face went pale. During the confusion of the explosion, while everyone was distracted by smoke and noise, Khalith had managed to slip a small dose of laudanum into Vex's whiskey flask. The man had taken a swig, not 5 minutes ago, trying to calm his nerves. You're lying, am I? How are you feeling, Vex? Getting a little tired. Hands starting to feel heavy. The outlaw's gun hand was indeed beginning to tremble slightly. Laudanum was fast-acting, and Khalith had judged the dose carefully enough to impair judgment and reflexes, not enough to cause permanent harm. Even if that's true, Vex said, fighting to keep his voice steady, I can still kill her before you draw. Maybe, but you won't. Why not? Because you're not a killer, Vex. You're a bully. A coward who hides behind other men's guns and threatens innocent women. A real killer would have shot her already and used her body as a shield. But you need her alive because she's the only thing keeping me from ending you. The psychological pressure was working. Vex's carefully constructed confidence was crumbling as the drugs took effect, and Khalith's words hit home. The man was beginning to realize he'd been outmaneuvered from the start. I'm going to count to 3, Khalith said quietly. On 3, Isadora is going to duck to her left. I'm going to draw my gun. You're going to have to decide whether you want to try to shoot a moving target while under the influence of laudanum, or whether you want to face me, man to man. You're insane. 1. Vex's hand was shaking more visibly now, the gun wavering against Isadora's head. 2. Wait. Vex's voice cracked. We can make a deal. Crow's got money, more than you can imagine. 3. Isadora threw herself sideways as Khalith's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw. Instead, he dove forward, using the momentum to tackle Vex around the waist. The outlaw's shot went wide, shattering a window as both men crashed to the floor. The laudanum had done its work. Vex's reflexes were sluggish, his coordination compromised. Khalith easily pinned the man's gun hand to the floor, while his other hand found Vex's throat. It's over, Khalith said, his voice deadly calm. Your men are scattered, half-conscious from the drugs. You've got nothing left. Vex struggled weakly beneath him, the fight gone out of his eyes. You... You didn't draw. Why didn't you draw? 'Cause I didn't need to. Khalith stood, helping Isadora to her feet and quickly untying her bonds. I told you I'd changed. Old me would have killed you and everyone with you. The new me found a better way. Sirens wailed in the distance, not the law, but the volunteer fire brigade responding to reports of explosions and gunfire. Soon the street would be full of people, witnesses to ensure Vex and his men couldn't simply disappear into the night. About Crow? Vex mumbled, the drugs making him talkative. He'll never stop coming for you. No. He needs Morrison dead, and he'll use anyone to make it happen. Then maybe it's time someone had a talk with Mr. Crow. Khalith retrieved Vex's gun and ejected the remaining bullets, pocketing them. The man was no longer a threat, but there was still unfinished business to attend to. Khalith, Isadora said softly, her hand touching his arm. You can't go after him. That's not who you are anymore. I'm not going to kill him, he assured her. But I am going to make sure he understands that some people can't be bought, threatened, or intimidated. Over the next hour, as the town's people emerged to survey the damage, Khalith systematically rounded up Vex's remaining men. The laudanum had indeed done its work. Most were too disoriented to put up much resistance. Those who tried to fight found themselves facing a man who'd learned to use his reputation as a weapon more effective than any gun. Doc Henley arrived with the fire brigade, taking charge of the captured outlaws and ensuring they received medical attention for their various injuries. Nothing permanent, but enough to keep them cooperative until the territorial marshal could arrive. "Impressive work," the old physician said, examining Vex's pupils. "Clean doses, no permanent damage. You've learned to use your medical knowledge almost as well as your gunfighting skills." "Had a good teacher," Calith replied, nodding toward the man who'd helped him plan the evening's events, as dawn broke over Cedar Falls. Calith stood on the general store's front porch with Isadora, watching the sun paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and rose. The damage to the town was minimal: a few broken windows, some scorch marks on the saloon's roof, and a hole in the store's wall that could be repaired in a day. "So what happens now?" Isadora asked, leaning against his shoulder. Now I'm going to write a letter to Sheriff Morrison, warning him about Crow's plans. Then I'm going to send word to the territorial governor about a certain crime boss who's been operating outside the law. And after that," Calith looked down at the woman who'd changed his life, who'd shown him that strength could be something other than violence. "After that, if you'll have me, I'd like to ask your father for permission to marry his daughter." Isadora's smile was brighter than the sunrise. "I think that can be arranged." 6 months later, a small church on the hill hosted the wedding of Calith Stormwind and Isadora Quinn. The ceremony was attended by most of the town, including Doc Henley, who served as best man, and even a few reformed outlaws who'd heard the story of the gunslinger who'd found redemption. The legend of Calith Stormwind lived on, with a different ending than most such stories. Instead of dying in a blaze of gunfire, he'd found something more precious than reputation: a life worth living, and a love worth protecting. Gideon Crow was eventually arrested by federal marshals, his criminal empire dismantled through careful investigation rather than violent confrontation. Sheriff Morrison remained in office, cleaning up Millbrook and making it a safe place for families to settle. And in Cedar Falls, a former gunslinger and his wife opened a small school, teaching the town's children that there were always alternatives to violence if you were smart enough to find them and brave enough to take them. The gun that had once made Calith Stormwind the most feared man in 3 territories now hung over the schoolhouse mantel, a reminder that even the deadliest weapons could be transformed into symbols of peace. But more importantly, it reminded everyone who saw it that people could change, that redemption was possible, that sometimes the greatest victory was the one that required you to never draw your gun at all. In the end, Calith had kept his oath, saved the woman he loved, and found a way to protect his town without becoming the monster he'd once been. It was, perhaps, the most legendary thing he'd ever done.